Hello, I'm Joanna Toch from Family Law Cafe. Welcome to the Family Law Cafe podcast. Today I'm talking to George Fattal, who is my assistant here at Family Law Cafe. He is a law student. He is in the last stages of qualification to be a barrister. So I thought it would be interesting if we had a chat. I'm going to be asking him about why he came to the bar, what his interests are, how he sees his future in family law. And then he's going to ask me some questions as well, from the other angle, why I got into law and how I see things at the other stage of my career. So, George, welcome.
Thanks for having me, Joanna.
And thank you for being here. I'm laughing because I think that since you've been here for the last year, we have worked incredibly hard, but we have laughed quite a lot as well.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah, and I think that in a way you have to do that. We work really hard in what we're doing, and we kind of see the kind of funny side of things when we have to. But I thought it would be useful today to ask you about your why you came to the bar, or why you're trying to be a barrister, because you're just at that stage, aren't you, of finishing your coursework to qualify as a barrister?
Yeah, well, I'm in exam mode as we speak. I do have about 6 weeks left, which is why I'm probably come across as a little bit agitated, so apologies in advance. I decided to come to the bar quite late in my journey in education. Previous to that, I did an economics degree, had no idea that I was interested in law. I worked in a few companies, one of them dealing with a bit of company law issues, and then ultimately the pandemic came across. And I thought it was quite an interesting time because everyone started talking about human rights and other legal concepts that I just wanted to study more about. So I literally did a law degree because I just wanted to know what everyone was talking about. Do I think I do understand what everyone talks about? Probably not. But then as I went through my legal studies, I did quite a lot of pro bono work. And I realized that what I really enjoy about law is being able to help people. And it's the people skills that drives me in terms of my career choices. So ultimately, I decided that I wanted to do a very people-focused type of law. Over time, I realised that family is that area for me. In terms of the bar rather than the solicitor route, which is often a question I do get, I think it's because I really enjoy advocacy. I think I do come from a family where we're Middle Eastern, and a lot of the time, being able to have a voice represent you is so important. And I think being able to be that for other people and really understanding their cultural experiences and being able to explain that in a way that puts their interests forward in a courtroom is something that I enjoy and I personally connect with. And that ultimately led me to pursue a career at the bar.
Okay, so a lot there. So what was your first degree in?
Well, my first degree was in government and economics at LSE, which was just around the corner.
Yeah, and then you did a law degree.
Well, I actually did a master's in regulation.
Yeah.
Ultimately, I had no idea what I wanted to do after my first degree, and I thought, why not just do a master's?
But then you did a law degree after.
Then I did a law degree.
So there's a lot of studying.
Absolutely, absolutely. A lot of time in the library, and I do think it was quite interesting, especially being a student at the time of the pandemic. I'd say I've really enjoyed it.
Yeah. And I know you were introduced to me about a year ago because I was looking for someone who had good academic skills, could assist me in everything I'm doing at Family Law Cafe. And I think we met up, and quite quickly I suggested that you come along, see how it goes. It's been about a year now, hasn't it?
Yeah, it's been over a year, which I can't believe. I think it was a perfect fit because I knew I wanted something that was family law focused and something that was innovative. I'm quite passionate about legal tech, and as soon as I realised that's what you do, I think it was quite clear that our interests aligned.
Yeah, and you, tell me what you've learned from working with us, and just want to just underscore, we haven't scripted this, have we?
Oh, absolutely
We're just
not.
on the hoof here.
Well, I think
So
the
you may
technical
shock
term
me.
is thinking on your feet, which apparently I'm meant to
Yeah.
have learnt, but
Yeah,
I
yeah.
think it's an ongoing skill.
Yeah, so what are the sort of things that you've learned, you know, looking at the practical side of things? Because obviously we talked about your academic study, and there's been a lot of that, but it's all been very practical, hasn't it, the help you've given this last year?
Yes, absolutely. I think where I've developed the most skills is being able to adapt to the particular needs of the customer. I do think that our customers are diverse, and that's one of the reasons I like working here. The fact is that they need different types of support.
Yeah.
I think it's really interesting, and it's often something that isn't really taught at on bar school in terms of how you adapt your communication style to the particular client. And I do think it is so important because oftentimes, especially just outside court, you're with someone at one of the lowest points of their lives. So being able to offer the support in a way that suits their needs is something that I've definitely developed and I really enjoy.
Yeah. So give me some examples of the sort of problems that have come up that you might not have expected.
Oh gosh, there are so many. I think one that comes to mind is one of our clients who unfortunately became quite ill towards the end of his case, both mentally and physically. He did suffer from quite a lot of illnesses, and I think it was being able to adapt to his needs. Another one that comes to mind, and actually I say it being one, it's a really sad feature that often special measures, which is where the court provides specific adaptations to the courtroom on the screen, exactly, or a separate waiting room in instances where there's domestic abuse. I often find that even though courts are required to do that, they often don't. So it's dealing with the practical issues of speaking to the court usher, making sure the client isn't exposed to danger. That's been a problem that I didn't expect to have to learn to deal with, but I have had to.
Yeah, because there's some things that are written down that should happen and they just don't happen, do they?
Oh, absolutely. And I mean, it's the practicalities. Again, I think I really undervalued the effects of that on family law and the outcomes that people get. Simple things like making sure the bundles get to court. I assumed that it would have happened quite easily, but quickly learnt that's not necessarily the case and things get lost in the post.
Yeah.
So I think, actually it was quite interesting that someone did comment that I was the person carrying 6 lever arch files down Chancery Lane yesterday in the gym. So I got a new reputation to myself, which I wasn't expecting.
But we have everything online, so that's a little bit of a craziness, isn't it? Because at the moment, people might think that the government has automated the family law system, but I find it really disappointing that it's just sort of court automated. So they have a portal, an online portal for some people in some cases. They have an online portal for solicitors, but not for litigants in person. I just don't understand why.
I mean, absolutely, I share the same frustration. I think there's definitely, when you do deal with the litigants in person, you do realise how difficult it is for them to understand, not just deal with the practicalities, but also I would say broader than that is understanding the terms that everyone uses. I have to say that some of the fact that we still use some Latin in the courtroom, I think is really problematic. I'm glad we're moving away from that, but I think there's still a lot more to do. Apologies to anyone listening who is passionate about Latin.
Yeah, I mean, there's lots of things that it's said they will happen, that we will make things more straightforward, but you're right, the documents, even now, I don't even know why it was decree nisi, now it's conditional order. I'm not even sure there's much difference really. It's just, maybe they should just say stage 1 and stage 2 to a divorce. What's the difference? You've still got to explain what a conditional order is. You've still got to explain how you would get decree absolute is still decree absolute. So it just seems not enough change to me.
And I'm surprised by the lack of knowledge of a lot of the basics of family law, and I have to say that it's so easier saying it from the other side now that I've done it for a year. But the most common misconception we get is belief that there is a common law marriage when it comes to a finances case. So a lot of people presume that because they've been with their partner for 20 years, for instance, that the court will recognise them as husband and wife. Yeah. And obviously that's incorrect. And it is something that I'm almost surprised that there isn't greater awareness on that. And I think equally, there's been the opposite issue there, which is that some people assume that because that they're not entitled to anything. So I've been quite surprised about the number of misconceptions that are still rife.
There's a huge amount of misinformation, I think. That's why I'm trying to put as much information out as possible, because sometimes even people we've worked with have turned around and said to me just before a hearing something which is completely wrong, and I've said, where's that come from? And they've said, the internet. And then I listen to what they say and think about it and think, oh yeah, but no, you've not understood that at all. So unfortunately, people will look things up and only understand a bit of it. It's a bit like me trying to, I don't know, service my car or something. I might be able to look some of it up, but I don't think I'd be very good at the whole thing. So I just feel there's a lot of information out there, but a lot of it is really inaccurate.
No, I definitely do agree with that. And I'd say that one of the things that we often tell our clients is that, yes, we want to do things differently, but nothing replaces old-fashioned advice. Yeah. And, you know, we can innovate in loads of ways to increase the productivity and reduce the amount of work that's needed with a more laborious task of family law, absolutely. But will anything ever change old-fashioned advice coming from someone who knows the law? I don't think that that's ever going to be possible.
Well, that is a nice link to what I wanted to ask you, is how do you see the future going in this area of law? Because you're going to be the person that's out there doing this 5, 10, 15 years time, not me.
Well, I would like to think that with certain tasks that there will be more automation. I would like to see greater use of AI. For example, if there's disclosure in a financial case, can technology be used in a way that's better than a human to understand bank statements and identify things that as humans we might not be able to identify? I think that not only would that increase productivity and reduce costs, but I also think it might lead to more just outcomes. So I think that's a win-win. I think people are quite scared of these new technologies, and I don't think that the law in its current form supports the promotion of these technologies. I have seen them exist in other industries, and I would like to see more progression towards that. And I do think it's going to have to come from legal reform in that area. So it is something that I do want to work with in my career going forward. I would say that we're going to see changes to do with cohabitation in terms of values and societal values. Obviously, that's been an area of law that's shifted massively in the last decades. And I do think that it's great that there's all this talk about reform, but I'm quite surprised about how it just seems that debate doesn't seem to be concentrated yet. It seems to be people just saying random comments here and there, but I would like to see an actual debate on it. I wonder if one day in perhaps the next parliament, it might be a big issue that everyone starts talking about.
Yeah, I was just thinking it's 50 years since the main act, the 1973 Matrimonial Causes Act. We're still using it. A lot that's changed in that time. So I kind of think that you're talking about the mechanics of, and I'm totally behind that. I think you're so right that there's just much more efficient ways of doing things. But I also think it might be due to just knock out the old act and just it's quite good in lots of ways, but there was reform of divorce, but there wasn't reform of divorce finances, and I think that's a major issue. I think it's a real problem at the moment.
Oh, absolutely, and I think I think it's almost, I'm somewhat surprised that the reform was almost attempted in quite a piecemeal way. I would have liked to see comprehensive reform, particularly simplification of existing concepts that I don't necessarily think are problematic, but I think would be a bit more accessible. I think when we use words and ideas that people don't even know exist, it can't be said to be in the interest of justice.
Yeah, because this is the biggest area where there should be a good functioning judicial system, and it is incredibly slow. I think the judges are great when you finally get there, but it's far too expensive and far too slow.
And I think
it shouldn't be.
That probably brings me on to the next big thing that I see as being really relevant is going to be the growth of private hearings, private FDRs that are done outside the courtroom to promote alternative dispute resolution. So a lot of the time, having to go to a court that could involve travelling quite a distance at a time that doesn't really work around having kids doesn't necessarily help get the outcome you want, because parties just end up being more stressed. So I think if there was a framework in terms of seeing a development in that area as well as other things, it's great to see arbitration really kick off as a way.
Has it though? I keep mentioning it to people, and I'm not sure many people go to arbitration, but they've pushed for that to happen, and there's going to be changes encouraging it in a couple of months. Honestly, I just wonder whether it's right to say people should find their own way of dealing with litigation rather than using the courts, because that's really saying the courts have failed in some ways. Arguably, you know, there's so many options now, but the court option, when it works, is very good, but it's just very expensive and very slow.
Oh, and absolutely. And I think the other side of the coin there is that we see a lot of people feel forced into alternative dispute resolution because they worry that they'll get a cost order against them, even though if the case isn't going to resolve in mediation. I think a lot of the time our new inquiries feel that they have to stay into alternative dispute resolution because they fear the costs that can happen if they don't. But ultimately, in some cases, that delay just leads to an increase in costs. And I think it's a shame that what I'm told about, and for me it's a bit historic, that used to happen was that you used to get free legal advice. And I think being able to get that advice at such an early stage would at least lead to the reduction in issues being brought to the court, and should have systematic change. So ultimately, I think the big change I'd like to see, if say I'm somewhat of a pessimist, would be bringing back legal aid.
It's a long time since, I mean, I think we're talking 10 years now, at least 10 years, I think more, but when most family cases were taken out of scope of legal aid, I just don't see that coming back. That's why I've tried, that was my impetus for trying to do things in a different way, because I guess I feel if there's something missing, just try and create something new, see if it works. And what about asking me some questions? What questions do you have for me?
Yes, absolutely. It does feel good to sit on this side of the table, considering I have just come back from an interview. Well, my first question, I would say, is how has the bar changed from when you started practice?
So much. Wow. Well, I was called to the bar in 1989, which is madness. And I started at a criminal chambers, and I had the impression that it was a perfectly okay thing. There would be loads of women there, but in fact, I was at a chambers led by a woman, and it was 15% women, and that seemed a lot compared to most chambers. So I think the percentage of women was about something like 7% overall, and there were more in crime than in other areas. So the biggest change probably has been that a very different looking bar to when I started. We weren't allowed to talk to solicitors in case we were touting, if we were advertising. So there was a complete bar on advertising itself. So we were a referral profession. Obviously in crime, wearing wigs and gowns, which they still do. I would never wear any jewellery. I would dress very, we weren't allowed to wear trousers, just saying that. We were not allowed to wear trousers, had to wear skirts, had to dress in a particular way. very conventional, very much you had to, I was a pupil in a good set, and it was very much sort of little alignments and different factors in chambers as to whether you would be given tenancy. It was a lot of fun. On the good side, I think there was much more of a drinking culture. We were in Middle Temple Bar every evening, the big, table and wine glasses and telling stories about being in court. I mean, my chambers it was a lot of fun. It really was. We were always having fun because we were just working hard and sort of playing hard. And I saw that change over the years, where people much more working from home, much more, I mean, it really was very much the top club that you ever wanted to be in, member of an inn. There's 4 different inns. You have to be a member of an inn as a barrister. So it was tough, it was rigorous, it was quite pressurised because we were told when we studied only 1 in 11 of you is going to become a barrister. So you always felt you were competing. And then you sort of, when I got there, and I remember I did crime for a while, I was like, I'm not even sure I want to do this. So, having got there, yeah, so that's some of the differences, and I'm sure it's still really difficult, but it definitely looks different, for better or for worse.
Are the issues that you've dealt with at the family bar different now to how they were at the beginning of your career?
I think I've done it long enough to see different fashions. So I dealt with a case in the 90s, and it was about domestic abuse, and the judge recognised that in that case the father was at war, use that phrase, at war with the mother. It was a reported case, and it was about how he undermined her parenting, and the judge made decisions based on that. And so, that was there, and it was the first time that domestic abuse, there was a groundbreaking case at that time. So that became very important, and it was dealt with in a certain way, and then there were changes, and now it's much more formalised in the steps that need to be taken. So there seems to be a greater perception of domestic abuse, but as you said earlier, sometimes that protection is more apparent than real. So different fashions, different ways of dealing with the same problems, if I can put it that way.
Well, I would say I'm going to ask you this directly because it is the main question that I get when I tell people I do family law, which does relate to the very gendered history that you were just talking about, is the fact the first question I get is that isn't the family law biased against men, or do the family courts hate men? That's the first thing I often get asked when I do tell people that I'm doing family law as a man. So I wondered what your thoughts on that are.
I think that shows a fundamental misunderstanding of what the family court is doing. The priority is the welfare of the child, and if children have been living with the mother as the main carer, then the court will look at the status quo and seek to continue that. And so once there's an understanding of what you're dealing with, I think it's easier then to understand their thinking. So I can completely understand that men would think, this is not a great arena for me. But also the family court supports children having a relationship with both parents. So really what they're looking for is, now the parents are separated, how do we make the best of that situation for the child? And that may mean that the man is not in the place of making decisions, because historically in that relationship the mother has been looking after the children. I'm seeing a lot more now of mothers who men are taking advice from me, and there's a different dynamic because they are out at work, they have been sharing the care of the child, or the man has been the main carer, and women are not reacting well to that in that situation. They're not happy about that. They're basically saying they're not accepting that position. So I think you're going to see more and more of that. So women who are going to say, this is unfair, I should be the main carer, but they haven't been. And the courts are then backing the man. So that's what people have to remember. What's the historic position when we were together? and how then is that going to play out in separation?
So one thing that we often talk about, and I'm sure a lot of people hear a lot about, is the phrase, what's in the best interest of the child? And we say that as if it's something that's easily defined or a textbook definition. I do wonder, firstly, how you'd unpack the term best interest of the child, but also I'd be interested to hear how that's changed over time, if it has at all.
I think people can overcomplicate it. So I'd say to them, just go back to the Section 1.3 of the Children Act, which lists out the factors the court has to take into consideration. Of course, at the end of it has all the circumstances of the case, but there's a list of factors, A to G. It begins with wishes and feelings of the child, but there's no preeminence to any of those factors. So you look at everything, and then I would just go through with people and say, look, this is a case about risk of harm. That's the magnetic factor in this case. So look at the factors in Part 1 of the Children Act. Don't overcomplicate it, and the best interests of the child are going to be looking at those factors and looking at what's relevant in that case. And people should understand that, don't put too much of a gloss on it. People talk about alienation. Yes, I understand that, but really what you're looking at is emotional harm, aren't you? So if a child is being negatively influenced against one parent, that is emotional harm, and that is part of the checklist factors. So I think the Children Act 1989 does have everything in it, and people try to make it too complicated, put too much of a gloss on it. Just go back to those factors, and then you will be able to work out the best interests of the child from that.
I think that's quite interesting. I think often we find a lot of people, when they do come to us, overcomplicate the case, and I think we often see a lot of documents and applications being thrown in that I think we both say that it doesn't really help their case and doesn't really point towards getting the outcome that they want. And I think one thing that I've seen we've been able to add value on is being able to focus time and effort. I guess.
Well, can I stop you? Because I think that's understandable. When you're in something, you can't analyse it, and they're right knee deep in all these problems, and they're dealing with day to day, and they're in the day to day. So what we're trying to do is lift them out of that and look into that. I mean, it's a very difficult thing to do when you're in it. So that's what we're trying to offer them, isn't it? An analysis. Sometimes when I'll listen and sound back to them and say, well, hey, actually, this is what I'm seeing about this. Does that sound right to you? And then, oh yeah, they get it, because they can't analyse their position because they're in the middle of it. And they keep battling against each other, and that's not going to be the answer, ultimately.
And I guess another question I do have for you is, what happens if you get to a stage in proceedings that aren't in your interest? The court have looked at the magnetic factor and ultimately ruled against what you want to happen. Is that the end of the road?
I think the biggest thing to say to people about children matters is no order in a child's life is ever final. And even now, the courts are looking at barring people from, they're saying you have to get permission to come back. So they're trying to give some stop to litigation or a pause to it. So if the court is not, if it's not helping you, get out of that arena. And sometimes, we're not promoting to people go to court. We're saying, where are you now? Where is your problem? Where do you need to be? Where's a reasonable place to get to? And what we want to do is move people there. And it might be better not to go to court or get out of court, because sometimes people are litigating against each other, spending huge amounts of money. And frankly, just think of the great holiday they could give their children to Disneyland or whatever with the money that they've spent. They don't have a self-awareness, and that's what I want to help people with and say, it doesn't always have to be court. Sometimes it has to be. There might be a good reason for it, but there should always be a reason why you're in court. You don't want to live there. You want to be there and get out.
What kind of out-of-court things might you suggest to someone? I appreciate that might be very case-dependent, but could you perhaps give an example of what you might recommend someone doing after coming out from court, getting an outcome that they're really not happy with in children's proceedings?
Well, I think just to generalise that question, if I can, the biggest decision you can make is how you're going to deal with the problem, isn't it? And that's what I try to explain to people, and that's why I set up Family Law Cafe, is to say, we're giving you strategy, we're giving you an understanding of all the different options. And the government is now changing the family procedure rules in April to say that non-court dispute resolution should be considered and parties can be sent back there. I mean, it's always been there, but they're just strengthening up those rules. And I think people are then slightly being overreacting to that. And I think that what's a little bit concerning is choosing your forum can be the most important decision. So people feel a bit mistrustful of mediation if they know that they're the weaker party, because usually in a relationship one party is stronger, is better at expressing themselves. Some people are not very good at that. Another person might want to have letters from a solicitor, another person might want to go to arbitration or go to collaborative law or go to court, or all of those different options. I always say to people, if you can try and just talk to each other, start there. If you can't, then consider mediation, give the pros and cons of it. And it depends on the mediator, of course. You know, mediators are different, or child-inclusive mediation. There are so many private initiatives that people should look around, but of course you've got to get the other party to sign up. So if it's gone to court, it hasn't gone well, that's probably the hardest position to be in. But sometimes you may have to think, is my child safe? These arrangements are not what ideal for me, but overall, is my child in a safe position, and can I help my child by just accepting that? Because accepting decisions is a very hard thing to do, but it can be the right thing to do, and you are the adult. There's too many adults, I think, that forget that they are the adult. The children don't really have a choice here. And sometimes accepting defeat and working with it, and I say defeat, it's not a winning or losing, of course it isn't, but it can feel like defeat. And just adjusting, that's the best thing you can do for yourself.
I guess one final question, which is, we say working with it. I think it's quite good to end on a note that's quite progressive and forward thinking. How might one work with it?
So going forward, what accepting the position that's not the position you want. I think that, you know, with Family Law Cafe, what I'm trying to promote to people, we all know that in the last, say, 5 to 10 years, there's been almost an explosion of people trying to train themselves to be better, to be stronger. I've always been a really big fan of coaching because I have a background in sport anyway. I know that I can get better in my sport by having coaching, so that's been a lifelong experience for me. So, you know, with Family Law Cafe, my hope is that we don't just offer people lawyers, but we offer them, you know, think about your better nutrition, think about your better mental health, think about your better fitness. All of those things are relevant, and they're all connected to family law. So, you know, and also to remember that in a child's life, things do change. Things are never permanent. So things, you know, I've certainly done this long enough to have seen cases where children have not wanted to see a parent at all, and they might have been 6, 7, 8 years old, and yet at 12, 13, 14, I think it's worrying if they don't see one parent, because what often happens is at a later age, they almost flip, and they realise they can't see both parents, so they just want to see the other parent. And so that may be what will come. You know, all things change in time, don't they?
Absolutely. I think there is so much to unpack there, and I don't think that doing it in the end of this podcast will serve any of that justice. And I think this is probably my plea to you to have another podcast episode on this specific topic, which I'm sure will be so useful to a lot of people out there. But I'm definitely not going to suggest that we do that right now, given the fact that it is a single episode and we've done so much already. So I might leave it that as a suggestion.
Leave it at that. One thing that is always the case with Family Law Cafe, people can always come back. We always keep everything's stored securely, so if people want to come back, then we're here. So I'm now going to have a little chat with my next guest, who is Protap Nath. So thank you, George.
Thank you for having me.
Hi there, Joe. How are you today?
I am so well, and just all the better from seeing you.
Very, very grateful. I've got some questions I want to ask you. I've been dying to ask you these questions actually. So
Okay,
great opportunity on this podcast. First one is, what inspired you to set up the Family Law Cafe? Because there's lots of chambers, firms, solicitors. So why the Family Law Cafe? And its platform as well, sorry.
Yeah, it's platform. So in about 2012, that I think marked me in about 25 years of doing family law. And so I was just a bit fed up with the fact that I would do cases where I would come in at the end and people had spent vast amounts of money and would just come in and sort of sort the whole thing out. And I just think, this wasn't that complicated. They spent far too much and they should have got some advice at the beginning. And I wanted to just flip that so that people got their advice at the beginning. And I came home and said to my daughter, I'm just going to set up a cafe and just get people down here to give their little talks. I'm completely fed up with this running about all over the country just doing these cases, and it just seems all a bit pointless really. Anyway, that lasted about a day. And then later on I was like, so developing this idea, and I did a lot of direct access work, which, as you know, is when people instruct the barrister directly without a solicitor. And my cousin was living with me, and she said to me, well, I think the thing is that people feel a bit apprehensive seeing a barrister. They haven't met before, we need to soften that a bit. So we planned that we would set up something whereby there'll be a softer side to it, that people come direct to a barrister, but they would also have, assistance on areas around family law. And then just over time, I talked to other people, and I thought, what are all the ways I can put in all my knowledge about family law to make something that is, started from scratch almost? And I thought, why isn't anyone just using online? Why are we all getting people to come to offices? Why are we getting them to travel to us? Why can't we offer something where we just have the meetings online, and then from that developed the sort of storage space online? I just had this mission that I wanted to start something new, and I kept thinking, everyone's going to do this. It's so obvious, everyone's going to do this, to the extent that I didn't really explain it on my website at all. So it just moved very, very slowly. I think I started it in about 2015, and it was quite slow, and I was still doing my barrister work. And really about a year, 15 months ago, I just thought, I've just got to just do this now, because no one really is doing this. And so I've tried to pretty much do it full time since then. And the idea is that take anyone with a family law problem, give them all the resources they need, say to them, where are you? Where do you need to get to? And that's when you give them all the resources they need, and you cost it out. And so rather than spending 40,000, they're spending more like, 5 or 10 to get the same outcome. Obviously, it depends how complex it is, doesn't it?
Sure, because that's a great answer. Because what I found using the platform, but it's new to me as well. Well, it was new to me when I first started using it, so I've used it for a few years now. It's just a way, it's a barrister-solicitor mix, really, what you've created. Tell me if I'm wrong.
No, you're right.
And also, they're able to put what they want on the platform. So rather than, let's have a conference, this is your hour, this is your time, let's discuss this, they may upload a document. So you've got a document section in the actual Family Law Cafe where it holds all the documents. So that way, they can, for instance, say, well, this is something which is concerning me, put the document out there, the barrister myself can view that, so if I'm invited into that particular platform, I'm there, and yourself or Family Law Cafe staff. So I think it's very useful having that way, because then it stops having lots of meetings and lots of stops in the process. So the next question is, how are you looking to develop that? So you've got this platform, they'll put all these documents in, you've got a good section to hold it all. What do you see the future with that? How do you see that moving?
Well, I think I've always been a creative thinker, and when I started this, I had so many ideas. Family law was only just one area. I want to do all the areas of law all over the world. You know, I'm a big thinker.
Right, okay.
I had all these ideas in the back of my head. The downside to all of that is, you know, you've got to actually get things done. It's all very well to have an idea. Obviously, my area of knowledge is family law, so that's a strength and a weakness, because it would always tempt me to go in, oh yeah, I could sort that one out and do that case. And that keeps me working in the business rather than developing the business. So I'm trying to stay away from that, to just develop it, get more barristers like yourself who understand it, work really well with it. And our system is customer. Well, you do. So our system is customer focused, and that's what most lawyers can't get their heads around.
Yes.
They're used to creating this very strong persona. You know, they're very knowledgeable and all of that, which obviously we are, hopefully, in what we do. But what I'm doing here is basing it around, it's the customer that's got the problem, and they come to us with the problem and we're helping them. That's why I call the lawyers servers. I don't know if you know that. So we have hosts that bring in people, hosts like a cafe. We have servers like a cafe.
Yes, I've seen that, yes.
And then we have what's called expediters, someone who's making sure that everything is, that people spend the least, they spend the least time, the least money, and they just get what they want. So that's the concept, and I've got loads of ideas to develop it. I mean, I'd be here all day of all the things I want to do, because obviously we should be using AI. We should make documents really simple and have, you know, so that people can just select their documents. So I've got the online case space, I've got the system, the basics of the system set up. So there's loads of ways it can grow, and it can go into other areas of law, and it's just a different way of working. It's a way of being really practical and getting results, just flipping the system. I don't see that people have to run around the system should be running around them. They're the consumers. We are the people that are working for them, and we need to remember that, really. So that's the big concept.
No, that's very interesting. So the whole divide between solicitors and barristers, how it was traditionally, solicitors would do the work, barristers couldn't interfere in there, otherwise they'll be seen as touting for business, so to speak. What you've done, you've got rid of all of that. Everyone's together, working collectively, customer focused. That's a bit which
teamwork. Because my sport is rowing, so there's different people in a team that make that boat go fast. You've got to do the same thing, and you can be in a team of 4 and a cox, let's say. I like to take everything back to rowing, but that team can go much faster. It's not, you don't have to be the 4 strongest people, but if you work well together. So what a solicitor's doing is different to a barrister. What a mediator is doing is different. You know, I've really worked in all those fields. So I think we have got probably the best legal system in the world, and we need to remember that, and we need to be, and we've got really well trained people, but what we're doing is putting everyone into silos and making the purchaser choose one or other. I don't think we should be doing that. That's so old-fashioned. People should be choosing what they need, but they need to understand what their choices are. And selling services is obviously much more complex than selling cans of beans. You know, but that's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to say, come in, we'll explain to you what the options are and what your best team is, and then as a team we will propel you forward to where you want to go. That's what we're doing.
Excellent, thank you. That's because I remember studying in my undergraduate days the amalgamation of the 2 systems, our solicitors and barristers.
Oh, thinking we always thought that they were going, but they're not joined.
No,
there's 2 separate systems.
Absolutely right. Yeah.
But I do think they're complementary.
Absolutely.
And in many jurisdictions, they are a joined system, aren't they?
That's correct. That's correct. And I think that's the beauty with the Family Law Cafe. I think you've managed to do that in some ways, getting everyone working together collectively. And my last question was AI, but I think you've answered that already.
Yeah, I think we all know that is.
That's the way.
I mean, a lot of people when I started, they wanted to invest and they wanted me to tell them it's all going to be AI. And I said to them, people are not ready for that because they need people. And what we have to understand with AI, that should be our servant, not our master. So there are obviously things that we can create documents now quite quickly, but we still need very well trained lawyers, because as we've seen recently, a lot of this stuff isn't very good, because it's a large language model trained on what's out there, and what's out there isn't really good enough. So when I talk about AI, that would mean training a large language model.
Yes.
I'm not saying taking what's there.
I've got you.
I'm saying something much more interesting than that, that you would, I mean, for example, what's to stop, well, I know what's to stop you, but can you imagine if you had all of the financial remedy cases for the last 5 years all fed in, and then with different situations showing you what the outcome's going to be? Well, have you thought about that?
Yeah, that's something. You're right.
So that would be creating
that would be,
a system.
Yeah.
And so that.
And do they follow that? Do they look at the misgivings somewhere, or how to improve it? And that's really what.
Well, it would be the start of people being able to say, if in that set of facts, there've been all these decided cases, so what is likely to happen in your case? And it would be a way then of trying to decide it. It's quite a big task.
Yes, of course.
It's not what I'm doing.
No.
But, you know, there's lots of ideas around that, and that's what I'm going to carry on doing for the next 30 years, one way or another.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.